artist most of all for his darling wife, Erica, and their two beautiful children. The thing is, every single person in this building, we owe something to Charlie. He was a joyful warrior for our country. He loved America. He devoted himself tirelessly to making our country a better place. He was a critical part of getting Donald Trump elected as president, getting me elected as vice president. And so much of our success over the last 7 months is due to his efforts, his staffing, his support, and his friendship. I was very honored a couple of days ago on September the 11th, 2025, to fly out to Utah, where Charlie was shot and killed, to meet his wife, to meet his mom and his dad, his sister, all just incredible people who didn't deserve to have this happen to them. And I was also honored to be able to take Charlie's remains from Utah to Arizona. It was an amazing, amazing thing. It was heartbreaking, and it was sad, and it was terrible. But what an honor it was for me and my family to be welcomed in to the Kirk Inner Circle at their moment of grief. There are a few things that I want to talk about just from that moment. First of all, when I first met Erica, his lovely wife, and such an incredibly brave soul. I'm not sure if you saw her remarks after Charlie died. If you haven't, I would encourage you to go and see them, because you see this raw grief and incredible courage all in the same moment. And that's what we need right now. We need to grieve, but we also need this courage in this moment more than we've ever needed it. She gave me a hug, and she was heartbroken, as of course she would be. And she said that she loved him so much. And I said, Erica, he loved you so much. He died way too young, but he died a happy man because of you, because of the family that you gave him, because of the home and the life that you guys had built together. And we sat for about an hour and we talked about Charlie. And, you know, in these moments, you don't know what to say. I'm a person who literally speaks for a living, and I had no idea what to say. And I didn't try to console her, because how can you console a person who just lost a loving husband and father? But we just talked about Charlie. We talked about who he was. We talked about some of our favorite stories. We talked about some of his idiosyncrasies and all the things that made Charlie Kirk who he was. And she said something to me that I will never forget. My wife was there. It was just me and my wife on my side, and then a lot of people from the Turning Points family, a lot of people from Charlie's family. And she said to me that Charlie never raised his voice, that he never cussed at her, that he was never cross or mean-spirited to her. And look, I'm a husband. I'm proud of being a husband. I think that on the great balance of things that I'm a pretty good husband, but I can never say that I was never unpleasant with my wife. I can never say that I've never raised my voice to my wife. Like most husbands, even the good ones, we're sometimes imperfect. And I took from that moment that I needed to be a better husband, and I needed to be a better father. Because of all these moments that I shared just in the last few days, the books that I've read to my kids, going up to their bedroom and kissing them and hugging them before bed, I just realized that all of these moments that I get to have, Charlie is not able to have them anymore. And Charlie's kids and his beautiful wife are not able to have them anymore. And maybe the best way that I can contribute and the best way that I can honor my dear friend is to be the best husband that I can be, to be the kind of husband to my wife that he was to his. You know, on a podcast a couple of months back, Charlie was asked about how he'd want to be remembered if he died. His answer, I want to be remembered for courage, for my faith. That would be the most important thing. The most important thing is my faith, and that was Charlie. And in this dark moment for our country, I think that's the greatest lesson any of us can take from Charlie. To have faith in the Lord, and to be bold in how we glorify him. To be bold in our pursuits as Charlie was in his. So that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time doing this afternoon. Keeping this incredible show he created going, and hearing from some of the people who were so fortunate to call Charlie a friend. We're going to pay tribute to his courageous legacy, and we're going to commit to keep it forever alive. I'm looking forward to this. Join us. I'm glad to be joined by Carolyn Levitt, our press secretary. Carolyn, so good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Very kind. I appreciate your saying that.
So why don't you kick it off and tell us a little bit? So those who don't know, who are listening or watching, you actually were involved with TPUSA very early on when you were in college. Tell me about that experience and about getting to know Charlie Kirk through that forum.
Sure. Well, I'm a Gen Z conservative, so I was really raised within the MAGA movement, and within the MAGA movement as a Gen Z conservative means you're very much a part of the Turning Point USA movement. And so my political education was not just through the rise of President Trump, but also the rise of Charlie Kirk.
Yep.
And watching him and listening to him, and I inquired about starting a Turning Point USA chapter on my college, St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I went and where my political ambition and love of media and politics really began. And so just by watching Charlie from a distance was so inspiring to me as a young conservative woman. And then I got to know him personally when I decided to run for Congress, and he was a tremendous supporter and friend.
Right. So you literally communicate for a living. You're the person that speaks to the American people and the world on behalf of the White House every single day. Did you learn anything particular about the way that Charlie Kirk communicated with people? And what I always appreciated is that though he was very smart, and though you see all these clips of him owning people or of him getting the better of somebody in a debate, if you watch a full Charlie Kirk rally and all of the Q&A, and I was just talking with Andrew about this off camera, 90% of it is Charlie being kind and being compassionate and offering moral support to people. What do you take from Charlie Kirk, the communicator?
So many things just by watching him and by being around him. But I think most of all, standing firm in your convictions and picking a fight, especially when you know you have the facts and the truth on your side, but doing it with a smile. And that's something Charlie did so brilliantly and well. He would go to these campus reform events and he would say to the crowd, if you disagree with me, come to the front of the line. And I find myself doing that in the briefing rooms, picking on the reporters whom I know very much disagree with me and with the president. But as long as you believe in what you're saying and you have conviction in it and you have truth and the facts on your side, it makes it a lot easier to say it. And that's what Charlie did for a living. And I know he inspired me as a young voice for President Trump now, like you said, behind the White House podium. And, before every briefing, I always pray to Jesus Christ. And Charlie was so outspoken with his faith, and I will continue to be in honor of him. But I'll also think of Charlie and just how brilliantly he was able to combat the lies with facts and to do it with a smile.
Absolutely. So, I always think of Charlie Kirk debating sometimes these kids on college campuses and how the one part of your job that maybe would be harder if you went on college campuses is I think some of these college kids ask way better questions than the radicals do in the White House press briefing room. So that'd be like good preparation for you in a lot of ways. Yeah, exactly. TPUSA was actually the varsity. Right. Now you're kind of the JV level with your opponents here, but you do such an incredible job. And you were, of course, not just the White House press secretary. You were also the main spokesperson during the Trump campaign. And what made, I want to ask how important Charlie was to the victory, because there were so many events that we did with TPUSA where I would show up and they were incredible and the energy was off the charts. And Charlie would always tell me whenever I went to Arizona, he'd say, don't worry about Arizona, worry about Michigan, worry about Wisconsin. We've got Arizona. Talk with a minute and 10 seconds remaining just about how important Charlie was to our effort to win and make Donald Trump the president of the United States.
Look, the president has said it himself. The president's massive gains with young Americans across the country was in no small part because of the efforts of Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. And our team on the campaign was constantly checking in with him and keeping him apprised of what the president was doing and saying, because we needed his voice to relay that to his audience, which is made up of young people across the country. And the president spoke at many Turning Point events. He went into that lion's den at the invitation of Charlie to get his message across. And Charlie was incredibly supportive of the non-traditional new media strategy that the president took. And, the president loved Charlie deeply. You know that, Mr. Vice President, and I know that. And I know he deeply is hurt by this loss because Charlie played an instrumental role in returning the president to the Oval Office. And I just love that clip from election night when Charlie realized President Trump had won. And he was speechless. For one of the few times in his life, there were no words, just tears.
Thank you, Caroline. Up next, the great Tucker Carlson joins me. We'll be right back. Joined and a close friend of Charlie, the great Tucker Carlson. Tucker, Thank you so much for being here. And we have 10 minutes, Tucker. And just to give you guys at home a little behind the scenes, the producer just showed Tucker a sign that said rap. And Tucker looked at it and said, this is expand on your point, right? So if we end up going 35 minutes, you'll know it's not the host's fault. It's Tucker Carlson's fault.
We read what we want to read.
But I had it, Tucker, I think you know this, and some of you know this because I wrote about it on X.com. But when X.com was Twitter, I did an interview with the Tucker Carlson Tonight Show on Fox News, and I got a message from a guy named Charlie Kirk that said, you did a great job. I really liked what you said, and let's keep in touch. And that began the start of my friendship with Charlie Kirk. That was the first time I had ever communicated with Charlie Kirk. So you've known him for a long time. You talked to him about a lot of issues, and I want to talk in part about how to honor Charlie's legacy, because I think that he modeled civil discourse within the right. He accepted there were big disagreements on all these issues, but he thought we were all on the same team and we could debate this stuff, but actually have a drink at the end of the day and recognize that we were all trying to accomplish fundamentally the good of the country. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Before I get there, just tell me about your buddy, Charlie Kirk. What was he like? What did people who only know him from radio or TV not appreciate about what a good guy he was?
That his Christianity was sincere, and his commitment to Jesus was totally sincere. And it, sometimes isn't, especially in public figures who throw out Bible verses they don't understand and stuff like that. But in his case, not speaking to anyone in particular, but in his case, it informed every single part of his life, from his marriage to the way he treated his children, to the way he treated his staff, to the way he approached disagreement, to the way he thought of other people, which was always primarily as people first. And that was, he was much younger than I am, and I met him when he was a teenager, so he's literally the age of one of my children. So it was kind of hard to take him seriously at first. And over the years that I knew him, more than 10 years, I ended up learning from him. I'm not just saying this because he's passed. I mean that sincerely. And the main thing that I learned from him was how to disagree with people on topics that you take very seriously and that they take very seriously without hating them, or without feeling bitterness. I mean, it wasn't, if people knew what was going on behind the scenes, there was a lot going on behind the scenes, and it was intense, and it was bitter. And, because the divide, particularly in foreign policy questions, is very real in the Republican Party. The neocons versus the realists, or however you want to describe it, he was on the realist side for sure. But he was mad at the people who disagreed with him. He liked them as people. He agreed with them on some things. And he would always say that. I agree. In private, he would say that. And, I was involved in it because people were mad at him for having me at his conferences or for talking to me. And so we had cause to talk about it a lot up until he was assassinated. And I was so struck the whole time. I would say, I would use the ugly language I'm famous for in private, and he would never talk like that. He would say, well, I agree with him on this, but obviously I'm on your side on that. And he just never forgot there was a person behind the views, and that inspired me. And God commands that of us. That's a real commandment, in my opinion, and he lived it.
That's exactly right, Tucker. He treated everybody with respect, and because he genuinely loved people and he genuinely wanted their salvation, he wanted them to have a relationship with God, he wanted them to know the truth, he always treated them with respect, maybe especially when he disagreed with them. And I think about this. So you talked about foreign policy. That is one of the big divides on the American right now. And the thing that Charlie seemed to understand intuitively is that the coalition that made Donald Trump the president of the United States and J.D. Vance the vice president of the United States, it included Tucker Carlson, but also Ben Shapiro. It included people who did disagree vociferously, but agreed on 70 or 80% of issues. And fundamentally, the question Charlie would ask is, if you're a good faith person and you're trying to do right, then you are part of the Big Ten. And I think that's something that we have to try to model together, because Charlie's no longer around to do it for us. And one way in particular, I was very touched by this. I actually texted Mark about this because you very generously have put out some donation link to help support Charlie's family. And think about it. Erica and the kids, most importantly, they're grieving the loss of a dear husband and father. But somebody, us, we're going to have to step in and fill the gap to provide for them in a way that Charlie no longer can't, because he was taken down by an assassin's bullet. You know who I saw share that link was Mark Levin.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really good example of how Charlie was able to bring people together from across our movement so long as we were operating in good faith. That was the question. If you were good faith, you're on his team.
That is exactly right. Good faith is the measure. And I have to say, I think now is exactly the wrong time to appropriate the memory of someone and the emotion that comes with that, the really intense emotion that all of us feel at his murder, and use it for your own parochial ends. Like, he stood for this, and I think the reason that Charlie was able to bridge the gap, particularly in foreign policy, is because he had, for example, genuine affection for Israel, which he expressed to me in private many, many times. Like, I love Israel. I don't think we should have another forever war, regime change war against Iran. And I think that made complete sense to me. I sort of agree with that, actually. And so it allowed both sides to talk to him because they felt like, this person doesn't hate me. It doesn't need to get existential. It's not about disliking me or some weird bigotry. But I don't think it's helpful for people to jump in, particularly foreign heads of state, to say, this is what, he lived for my cause or whatever. That's disgusting, actually. Don't do that. That turns everybody off. You don't help your own cause by doing that. And it's also literally untrue. So I just hope that we can continue in, I'm not exaggerating, the spirit that he operated in, which is one of love for other people, including people we disagree with, and don't make it, as small bore as that. That doesn't help.
Yeah, so one of the issues, Tucker, I agree with you, that he would express disagreements with the administration on. There are two that jump out. Is one, Charlie was a hardliner on immigration. He wanted us to control our borders as much as possible. Yes. He wanted us to ramp up the deportations. I remember having conversations with Charlie where he would say, why aren't the deportations higher? Why aren't you doing more? And I would talk to him. But it wasn't, hey, I don't understand this, or I disagree with you, and therefore I'm going to blast you and assume that you're in bad faith. It's, I'm a free citizen. I love you guys. I supported you guys, and I'm going to use my platform to try to accomplish as much good as I possibly can. And I think that made him such an effective operator. And I would talk to Charlie and say, Charlie, well, look, here are the reasons why. And as you've seen, Tucker, we've ramped up deportation numbers. We have actually, there are a lot of people who are self-deporting because they don't want to be in the country knowing that eventually immigration enforcement will happen. But I think part of that success comes from people like Charlie applying pressure. Pressure as a friend, pressure as somebody who cares deeply about the issue. And that's true also, I know we have about 90 seconds left, but that's true about foreign policy. Like, I remember Charlie calling me and saying, I'm really worried. And this was back in the summer when the Iran strikes were sort of first being contemplated. He said, I'm really worried this is going to become another regime change war in the Middle East that we get trapped in. And I said, Charlie, first of all, have some faith here. The President of the United States is not a believer in perpetual war. He knows the mistakes of Iraq and Afghanistan. He doesn't want to repeat them. But Charlie was very clear that he could support Israel. And by the way, he did eventually support the strikes on the nuclear facility while simultaneously saying, no more. This can't become a bigger thing. This can't become a broader thing. And again, I think he modeled a really good way of applying pressure, of disagreeing when you do disagree, but also recognizing that so long as you're operating in good faith, we're all part of the team. And that's something I'm going to try to take from Charlie's legacy is not that we're always right, not that we can't take criticism, but that we all should try to work together.
It did worry me because I think your description is perfect. He's one of the very few who took that message and stood by it. I mean, right to the very end. This cannot get bigger. We don't want another regime change war. But man, some of the people who send money to Turning Point, his donors, were very tough on him. So tough on him that I could feel it. I talked to him a lot in the last few months, and he was under enormous pressure. He never bent. He never became bitter.
He kept his integrity to the very end.
To the very end. And I just think it's important to say that because it's true.
Joining us now is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., our great Health and Human Services Secretary. Bobby, thank you so much for being here. And one of the things that I always took from Charlie was this idea that we needed to grow the coalition and expand the coalition. There's probably no person in the entire administration who better exemplifies that than you. One of the leading consumer advocates, health advocates that exists in our country, but until a few years ago, more aligned, given your name, You were a scion of one of the great political families on the Democratic side in American history. But now you're one of the most important members of the administration in a Republican administration. Maybe talk, if you would, just a little bit about Charlie's approach to politics and how it ultimately made you one of the most important people in the federal government.
Yeah, well, Charlie was probably the primary architect of my unification with President Trump. I actually announced my endorsement of President Trump at a Turning Point rally in Arizona, which was his idea. And he was, for people who were there, remember it, there was all these kind of fireworks and sparklers on the stage when we shook hands, and that was all Charlie's orchestration. That was his idea, and he insisted on that. But I first met Charlie in July of 2021. I had just written a book about Anthony Fauci, and he had me on his show for this very, very wide-ranging interview in which he really let me talk a lot, which was unusual at that time because I was not allowed to talk on most outlets.
Sure.
And I think both of us approached each other with some trepidation because we came from such different places. By the end of that interview, I felt like I'd met a spiritual soulmate, and our friendship blossomed after that. And even during the campaign, when he was strongly supporting President Trump, we always had a communication and outreach. And then after I made the endorsement, I saw him all the time, and he helped me a lot during the transition.
Yep.
As did you, as did Tucker. And helped a lot. Amaryllis, who's my daughter-in-law, he really kind of pushed her to get the job that she has today. So, but the thing that united us was his total commitment to free speech. And now it had been a theme of my campaign. I had been subject to censorship like so many other people during COVID, and saw the threat that it was to our country, so that once they understood, they could censor us. And Charlie and I talked about this, that the founders put the freedom of speech in the First Amendment because they knew all the other rights depended on it. If a government can silence its opponents, it has a license for any kind of atrocity. And, as soon as they realized that we were going to put up with that, they went after freedom of assembly, which is the First Amendment, with social distancing regulations. They went after freedom of religion, closing all the churches in this country, which is extraordinary. It's extraordinary that we let get away with that. And by the way, they kept the liquor stores open as essential businesses. They went after the Fifth Amendment. They shut all of our businesses, 3.5 million businesses, with no due process, no just compensation. They went after the Seventh Amendment right to jury trial. Seventh Amendment says no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers. In case there are controversies exceeding $25, there's no pandemic exception. And yet they were able to give these broad categories of industry these exemptions from any litigation, no matter how much they hurt you. They went after the Fourth Amendment prohibitions against warrantless searches and seizures by making us disclose our medical information. So the entire Constitution came under attack as soon as they realized that they could go after free speech.
So we have 80 seconds left on radio, then we'll continue streaming for the folks who are watching live on the internet and other platforms. But to talk to me just a little bit about Charlie's influence and actually politically getting you to be the H&HS secretary, because I remember he was such a strong advocate for you. He was so proud of the president and of you when the president nominated you. Obviously, like all of our big nominees, there was a tough confirmation fight. Just give us 50 seconds on how important he was to making you have the position and the title you have right now.
Well, you know what the transition is like. You never kind of know what's going to happen. And he was a critical ally for me in calling President Trump. And at first, when President Trump asked me whether I wanted this job, I was tentative. I didn't know whether I wanted to handle a Medicaid and Medicare portion, which is the biggest, economic, very good on that. But so he was a pragmatist, but he was also one of the most idealistic people that I've ever met.
He was.
And his principal preoccupation was with conversation. He thought conversation was the only thing that could heal our country. We have all these forces, and particularly the algorithms now in social media, that are driving us apart. And it's inexorable. There seems to be nothing that could stop it. And he understood that the only thing that could bridge that gap was debate, was open debate, and that censorship was the enemy of that. And that in order to have real conversations, we had to end the vitriol. We had to stop being poisonous toward each other. We need to say what we mean without saying it mean.
Yes.
And he was just amazingly, he was so respectful of the people who disagreed with him. He gave them the most respect and the greatest hearing. He wanted their voice to be heard. I saw on one of the networks just now that there's this big revolt against social media because of their contribution to the polarization that ultimately led to his death, this brewing up of hatred. Ironically, I think Charlie would revolt against that.
Yes.
Because he hated censorship.
Yes.
What he said is the answer is conversation and dialogue. And we need to learn to do that if our democracy is going to survive. If we're going to survive, we need to talk to each other, even though all these things are telling us not to.
Yeah, so I talked to Charlie. It was either the night of or the day after our debate with Tim Walz. And, he was excited. He told me how great I did. And obviously it's awesome to hear from a friend who tells you that you did a great job. But he asked what I thought of Tim. And I said, honestly, because you get in this sort of bunker mentality in the campaign, it's us versus them. And I was like, honestly, even though I'm glad that I think I did well, and I certainly don't want this guy to become vice president, I actually kind of liked him afterwards, after 90 minutes of talking with him. And Charlie said, that's why I do all these debates. It's like you can disagree vehemently with somebody, but if you're actually communicating with them, it's really hard not to appreciate at least a little bit. As a human being, even if you think they're 100% wrong on the issues, you can appreciate them a little bit as a human being, and that's what Charlie was so good at. So with all respect to you and all gratitude for being such a big part of his life the last couple of years, Bobby, good to see you. And of course, liberal billionaires rewarded that attack. Now, of course, even if Charlie had uttered those words, it wouldn't mean that he deserved his fate. But consider the level of propaganda at work. Charlie was gunned down in broad daylight, and well-funded institutions of the left lied about what he said so as to justify his murder. This is soulless and evil. But I was struck not just by the dishonesty of this smear, but by the glee over a young husband's and young father's death. Quote, she says, he was an unrepentant racist, transphobe, homophobe, and misogynist. The Nation wrote, who often wrapped his bigotry in Bible verses because there was no other way to pretend that it was morally correct. He had children, as do many vile people. That's what they said. He had children, as do many vile people. Now, hours before this smear was published, my wife and I had the honor of escorting Charlie's body back to his home in Arizona. We took his wife, Erica, we love you, his parents, his sister, and a few of his best friends with us. And as they offloaded Charlie's casket from Air Force Two, I worried that Erica would collapse with grief. Now, I'm a very lucky husband to a very wonderful wife, but I have never been prouder of my wife than that moment as she held Erica in Erica's very darkest hour. And I thought of Erica as I read that disgusting attack on Charlie. He had children, as do many vile people. That's what they said about him. I said the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I asked TPUSA what Erica had said to her earlier in the day in a private moment, and I asked Erica's permission to share this. My wife told me, she asked me for advice. Erica asked me for advice on how she should tell her children that their father had been murdered. She asked my wife how to tell her beautiful kids that their father and my dear, very dear friend is no longer with us. And as she was doing it, there were people dancing on that father's grave. Now, I have heard many calls in the last few days for unity and for healing in the wake of Charlie's assassination. You have no idea how desperately I want that, how gratified I was when Democratic friends and even former Senate colleagues reached out to offer their condolences to me. I'm so thankful. And I know there are so many like them all across our great country. I am desperate to wrap my arms around them as we all unite to condemn political violence and the ideas that cause it. Psalm 133 tells us, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head." Oh, how badly have I craved that precious ointment in recent days, and I believe we can have it. But first, we must tell the truth. It's the only way to honor Charlie, for what was he, if not a man who told the truth in every place, in every environment? Now, the most important truth Charlie told is this: that long ago a man, begotten, not made, came down from heaven, and by the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became man. For our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate and suffered death and was buried and rose again on the third day. Charlie believed, as I do, that all the truth he told flowed from that fundamental principle. I really do believe that we can come together in this country. I believe we must. But unity, real unity, can be found only after climbing the mountain of truth. And there are difficult truths we must confront in our country. One truth is that 24% of self-described, quote, very liberals believe it is acceptable to be happy about the death of a political opponent, while only 3% of self-described very conservatives agree. 3% is too many, of course. Another truth is that 26% of young liberals believe political violence is sometimes justified, and only 7% of young conservatives say the same. Again, too high a number. In a country of 330 million people, you can, of course, find one person of a given political persuasion justifying this or that or almost anything. But the data is clear. People on the left are much likelier to defend and celebrate political violence. This is not a both sides problem. If both sides have a problem, one side has a much bigger and more malignant problem, and that is the truth we must be told. That problem has terrible consequences. The leader of our party, Donald J. Trump, escaped an assassin's bullet by less than an inch. Our House Majority Leader, Stephen Scalise, came within seconds of death by an assassin himself. And now, the most influential conservative activist in generations, our friend Charlie, has been murdered. This violence, it doesn't come from nowhere. Now, any political movement, violent or not violent, is a collection of forces. It's like a pyramid that stacks on top, one support on top of the other. That pyramid's got a foundation of donors, of activists, of journalists, now of social media influencers, and of course of politicians. Not every member of that pyramid would commit a murder. In fact, over 99%, I'm sure, would not. But by celebrating that murder, apologizing for it, and emphasizing not Charlie's innocence, but the fact that he said things some didn't like, even to the point of lying about what he actually said, many of these people are creating an environment where things like this are inevitably going to happen. A couple of months ago, I headlined a fundraiser in Southern California, and since, we'd be out there anyways, my wife and I decided to take our kids to Disneyland one weekend. We had fun, and to be clear, most of the guests said very nice things, or they just left us alone. But there was a loud and very cool minority that would shout at my children, who were 8, 5, and 3, whenever they got the opportunity. "You should disown your dad, you little shit," one middle-aged woman yelled at my 5-year-old. Tell the Secret Service to protect the Constitution, not your father, screamed another. Are these women violent? Probably not. Are they deranged? Certainly. And while our side of the aisle certainly has its crazies, it is a statistical fact that most of the lunatics in American politics today are proud members of the far left.
Yes.
After Charlie died, one of his friends and one of our
Sure,
senior
sure.
White House staffers had left-leaning operatives in his neighborhood passing out leaflets telling people what he looked like and where he lived, encouraging neighbors to harass him or, God forbid, to do worse. While he was mourning his dead friend, he and his wife had to worry about the political terrorists drawing a big target on the home he shares with his young children. Are these people violent? I hope not. But are they guilty of encouraging violence? You damn well better believe it. We can thank God that most Democrats don't share these attitudes, and I do, while acknowledging that something has gone very wrong with a lunatic fringe, a minority, but a growing and powerful minority on the far left. There is no unity with people who scream at children over their parents' politics. There is no unity with someone who lies about what Charlie Kirk said in order to excuse his murder. There is no unity with someone who harasses an innocent family the day after the father of that family lost a dear friend. There is no unity with the people who celebrate Charlie Kirk's assassination. And there is no unity with the people who fund these articles, who pay the salaries of these terrorist sympathizers, who argue that Charlie Kirk, a loving husband and father, deserved a shot to the neck because he spoke words with which they disagree. Did you know that the George Soros Open Society Foundation and the Ford Foundation, the groups who funded that disgusting article justifying Charlie's death, do you know they benefit from generous tax treatment? They are literally subsidized by you and me, the American taxpayer. And how do they reward us? By setting fire to the house built by the American family over 250 years. I'm desperate for our country to be united in condemnation of the actions and the ideas that killed my friend. I want it so badly that I will tell you a difficult truth. We can only have it with people who acknowledge that political violence is unacceptable, and when we work to dismantle the institutions that promote violence and terrorism in our own country. Now, our government, you heard me talk to Stephen Miller about this, will be working very hard to do exactly that in the months to come. We're not always going to get it right. We will sometimes move more slowly than you would like. We will sometimes move more slowly than I want us to. But I promise you that we will explore every option to bring real unity to our country and stop those who would kill their fellow Americans because they don't like what they say. But you have a role too. Civil society, Charlie understood this well, is not just something that flows from the government. It flows from each and every one of us. It flows from all of us. So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. And hell, call their employer. We don't believe in political violence, but we do believe in civility. And there is no civility in the celebration of political assassination. Get involved. Get involved. Get involved. It's the best way to honor Charlie's legacy. Start a chapter of TPUSA or get involved in the one that already exists. If you're older, volunteer for your local party, write an op-ed in your local paper, run for office. I can't promise you this is going to be easy. I can't promise you that all of us will avoid Charlie's fate. I can't promise you that I will avoid Charlie's fate. But the way to honor him is to shine the light of truth like a torch in the very darkest places. Go do it. We owe it to our friend to ensure that his killer is not just prosecuted but punished. And the worst punishment is not the death penalty, but the knowledge that Charlie's mission continues after he's gone. St. Paul tells us in the book of Ephesians to put on the full armor of God. Let all of us put on that armor and commit ourselves to that cause for which Charlie gave his life, to rebuild a united state of America, and to do it by telling the truth.